The ship came in silence, drifting through the black of space like a wounded beast. Its hull scarred its engines. Weak, but still it carried its cargo, the weight that pressed on every soldier's chest who stood waiting at the outpost docking. They had been told a monster was coming, a prisoner so dangerous that whole fleets had fallen trying to chain him, and now he was here. Bound in unbreakable shackles, forged in alien fire, escorted by guards who looked pale as if the very presence of this creature had drained their courage. The air grew colder as the heavy doors opened, and a line of armored escorts marched forward, dragging the figure behind them. His body was massive, taller than any human, his skin marked with strange glowing scars and chains that rattled with each step he took. His eyes burned like embers, yet he walked without fighting, without roaring, only silent, as if carrying a pain older than the stars. The officers whispered among themselves. Some called him a weapon, others a beast. Some even lowered their eyes, afraid to meet his gaze. And yet there was one who did not look away, the young lieutenant assigned to guard him. Her name was Mara. She stood stiff and tried to appear strong, though her heart pounded inside her chest. She had read the files. She had been told he had destroyed colonies, slaughtered soldiers, broken planets. But when his eyes lifted and met hers for the briefest moment, she saw not rage, but something else, something she could not name. It was almost human. The guards shoved him into the reinforced cell walls, thick with energy fields. Metal doors layered with locks, chains that wrapped his arms, his legs, his neck, and then they sealed him. Inside the chamber, warning, no one was to approach. No one was to listen to his words, because his words were poison. Yet even as they left, Mara felt the strange pull in her chest, as though his gaze carved a question into her soul. At night the station was quiet, engines humming, lights dim. The other soldiers drank or slept, but Mara found herself walking past his cell again and again.
Ow.
The prisoner sat motionless, his head bowed, the chains glowing faintly around him. Then just as she passed, he lifted his face and whispered something. Her name. She froze, every muscle tight. How could he know her name? No one had spoken it aloud near him, she told herself. It was a trick, a lie meant to break her, but the sound of her own name, carried in that deep, quiet voice, stayed in her ears. She forced herself to walk away, but could not sleep. Hours later, she returned, standing before the reinforced glass. The monster did not roar or curse. He only looked at her, his eyes glowing dim in the shadows, and then in broken, heavy words he spoke again, softer. This time, do you remember me? She stumbled back, her pulse racing. What did that mean? She had never seen him before, never met him yet. Something stirred at the back of her mind. A flicker of images she could not hold, a flash of fire, a figure standing against the dark, protecting, not destroying. She gasped and gripped the rail to steady herself. The alarms in her head screamed, leave, ignore him, follow orders, but her feet stayed rooted, as if some invisible chain held her there. The prisoner lowered his head again, silent, as if he knew he had said enough. Mara backed away, breath short, trying to convince herself it was only a trick, only a monster trying to get into her head. But deep inside, she felt the first spark of doubt, and that doubt was more dangerous than any chain. The next day, the station bustled with activity, officers shouting orders, soldiers moving cargo engines, roaring as supply ships came and went. But beneath all that noise, Mara's thoughts kept circling back to the prisoner. She had tried to shake it off, telling herself it was nothing, just a hallucination born from fear, yet she could still hear his voice in her head. The way he had spoken her name, the way his eyes had searched hers, not with hatred but with something she could not define. She tried to bury it under routine drills, but when her commander summoned her, she felt the weight of suspicion already pressing down on her shoulders. He reminded her of the rules: no contact, no conversations, no hesitation. He repeated that the prisoner was not a man, but a weapon wrapped in flesh, a monster that had to remain locked until the day command decided to use him or destroy him. Mara saluted stiffly, but deep inside she felt a shiver, because she was no longer sure if she believed his words. Later that night, she patrolled the restricted wing, the air heavy with silence, the hum of the energy field buzzing through the walls like a second heartbeat. She walked slowly past the cells, her steps echoing until she reached his. The prisoner sat in the shadows, his head lowered, his chains glowing faintly, and though she told herself she would keep walking, she stopped, her eyes fixed on him, as if drawn by some unseen force, and then his voice came again low, deep, carrying across the barrier, not like a roar, but like a memory. "Mara," he said. Again she swallowed hard, forcing strength into her voice. "How do you know my name?" she demanded. The prisoner lifted his head, his eyes glowing faintly through the dark. "Because he said you once saved me?" Her breath caught. It was impossible. She had never seen him, never known him, not in this life. Not in any record she had ever read, yet his words pulled something from deep inside her, something that felt like a forgotten dream. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're lying," she whispered. His gaze did not move. He only said, "Chains are not always made of metal. Some are made of time." Mara's mind spun. She felt the walls closing in. She was trained to recognize manipulation, tricks, illusions designed to weaken her resolve. But what frightened her most was not that he lied, but that part of her believed him. She clenched her fists and turned away, leaving quickly, her boots striking the floor louder than she meant them to. Her heart raced long after she reached her quarters. Over the following days, the pressure grew. She avoided his cell, but she could feel him even when she was far across the station, the way one feels a storm building behind the horizon. Officers spoke of strange energy fluctuations around the prisoner's chamber systems. Flickering lights, dimming power drains, unexplained by engineering. Some said it was his presence leaking through the chains. Some whispered that the shackles themselves were alive, feeding on him, or perhaps failing to contain him. One night, when alarms rang suddenly, Mara rushed with her squad to the restricted wing. Soldiers shouted that the cell had flared, that the energy fields had almost collapsed. Sparks filled the hall. The doors groaned under stress, as if something inside pressed against them with impossible strength. And through the smoke and fire, Mara saw him standing, his chains burning like molten iron, his body tall and terrible, yet his face calm. And when their eyes met across the chaos, she did not see rage. She saw restraint, as if he was fighting not to break free, but to hold something back. The security team scrambled to reinforce the barriers. Technicians cursed as systems flickered, but the moment passed. The prisoner sank back to the floor, and the chamber sealed again. Mara stood frozen, unable to move, her chest heaving as her commander barked orders. But she did not hear him, because she understood now. The truth was not simple. This creature, this monster, was dangerous, yes, but not in the way they had told her. He was not only a threat, he was a secret, and somehow she was becoming a part of it. When the hall cleared and silence returned, Mara stayed back, her hand pressed against the cold glass separating them. He looked up once more, his voice faint, but steady. "The chains are not mine alone, Lieutenant. They are yours too." Her breath shuddered out, her body stiff with fear, yet she could not pull away. The seed of doubt had grown into something stronger, and for the first time she feared not the prisoner, but the lies that surrounded him. Mara could not sleep that night. The hum of the station's engines pressed against her ears, the silence between each sound heavier than noise itself. She lay in her bunk, staring at the dim
ceiling lights, replaying his words. "Chains are not mine
alone, they are yours too." She clenched her fists, trying to drive the thought away, but the weight of it refused to leave every time. She closed her eyes. She saw his face, not twisted with fury, not monstrous, but calm, almost sorrowful, and somehow familiar. She rolled out of bed, unable to stand the confinement of her quarters, and walked the empty halls. The metallic echo of her boots, the only sound. When she reached the restricted wing, the guards on duty gave her a sharp glance, but said nothing. She was a lieutenant after all, and outranked them. Still, her heart beat faster as she neared his cell. She told herself she only came to confirm the systems were stable, only to check nothing was wrong. But when she saw him again, sitting in the dim glow of the failing lights, she knew that was a lie. His chains rattled faintly as he lifted his head to meet her gaze, and for a long moment neither spoke. Finally, Mara whispered, "What are you?" His eyes seemed to search her, as though the answer lay not in his words, but in her memory. "A guardian," he said. "Once your guardian." Mara flinched, her mind racing through training, through every story command had told her. Guardians were myth's ancient protectors from Earth's first wars with the stars' beings, who fought in secret and disappeared into legend. No one alive had ever seen one. The Academy dismissed the stories as propaganda from a time when humans needed myths to keep fighting. But here in front of her, bound and chained, was something that felt far more real than any story. "You are lying," she said again, forcing the words, but her voice trembled. The prisoner's eyes burned faintly. "You saved me once," he repeated, "and when darkness came, I swore to save you." In return, Mara's breath quickened, because deep inside a memory stirred, a flash of fire, skies breaking, a hand reaching for hers, and then nothing like a dream she could never hold. She stepped closer, her hand almost brushing the glass. Before she caught herself, she pulled back, shaking. "No, I don't believe you." The prisoner lowered his gaze, as though her denial hurt more than the chained silence. Stretched heavy until the sound of footsteps filled the corridor. Her commander entered, flanked by 2 officers, his eyes cold as they fell on her. "What are you doing here, Lieutenant?" Mara stiffened. "Sir, I was checking the energy readouts." He cut her off sharply. "No excuses. You will follow orders and stay clear of this cell." He studied her a moment longer, suspicion in his gaze, then signaled the guards to continue their patrol. As he left, Mara's heart hammered. She felt trapped, caught between the weight of duty and the pull of something she did not understand. The next day, the whispers grew stronger among the crew. Stories of nightmares. Soldiers claimed they heard voices in the dark. Some swore they saw shadows moving beyond the reinforced glass. One engineer refused to return after seeing the prisoner's eyes glowing brighter than any sensor light. Fear spread like a sickness, and yet Mara felt drawn back again and again, her thoughts circling endlessly around his words. When she finally returned, the prisoner spoke before she could open her mouth. "The chains are weakening," said quietly. "Not by me, by what waits beyond the stars." Mara froze. "What do you mean?" He lifted his head, his eyes burning with a terrible calm. "The darkness is coming, and when it does, these chains will not hold me or you." She pressed her hand to the glass, pulse racing. "What darkness?" He leaned forward, the energy fields crackling faintly around him. "Something older than war, older than guardians. It eats stars." "Mara," his voice dropped lower, as if speaking the words could awaken it. "It drowns galaxies, and Earth was the first to wound it. That is why it hates you, why they chained me here, because I carry the memory of its fear." Mara's throat went dry, a chill crawling down her spine. She wanted to reject it, call it madness, but the conviction in his voice felt unshakable. She stared at him, the truth clawing at the edge of her mind. If he was right, then everything she had been told about him, about Earth, about the wars, was a lie. She whispered through the silence. "Why tell me?" He met her gaze steadily. "Because you are the only one who will believe before it is too late." Her breath caught her chest tight with fear and something else, the dangerous spark of belief. For the first time, Mara realized she was no longer afraid of him. She was afraid of what was coming. The days passed, but Mara could not shake the prisoner's words. They repeated in her head like an echo that refused to die. "The darkness is coming." She found herself staring at the stars whenever she had the chance, watching the distant glimmer of light across the black expanse of space, wondering if somewhere out there the thing he spoke of was already moving, already devouring. Yet when she asked command for updates about enemy activity or strange anomalies, she was told nothing but silence. No unusual readings, no threats recorded, no signs of movement. Still, the unease spread across the crew. Soldiers muttered in hushed voices about dreams of shadows swallowing them whole. Engineers complained of power drains that sensors could not trace. And in the mess hall, more than one officer swore they felt eyes on them when they walked near the prisoner's cell. Mara kept her distance during the day, but at night, when the halls were empty, her feet carried her back again and again to the reinforced glass, and every time he was waiting, chains glowing faintly, eyes fixed on her as if he knew she would come. Sometimes he did not speak. He only watched her as though measuring her soul, but other times his voice came low, steady, with a weight that made her chest tighten. "I was forged for war," he told her once, "not against humans, but for them. They chained me because I became a reminder of what they wanted to forget." Humanity once rose, higher than fear, higher than weakness. The darkness hates that, and so do those who serve it. Mara's breath trembled at his words, but she forced herself to ask, Then why kill, why destroy the colonies? He lowered his head. And the chains rattled softly. I did not. He whispered. The silence after was heavier than steel. It was on the fourth night that Mara noticed something wrong. The cell doors flickered for just a heartbeat. The energy shields dimmed and surged back, as if something had pressed against them from the outside. She froze her hands tight against the glass, her eyes darting to the prisoner, but he was already watching her with calm certainty. You see, he said, it is beginning. She wanted to demand answers, but before she could, alarms blared through the station lights, flashing red. Voices shouting over comes power loss in Sector 9, systems failing across the outpost. Soldiers rushed down the corridors, weapons ready. Mara was pulled into the flow of panic as her commander barked orders: contain the prisoner, check the reactors, maintain shields. She turned to look back one last time and saw him standing tall within his chains, not struggling, not resisting, only waiting, as if everything was happening exactly as he expected. The crew fought to stabilize the outpost, engineers running between control panels, technicians shouting as lights flickered and died. Mara's commander cursed, demanding answers, but none came. The sensors showed no ships, no enemy fire, nothing, just a vast blank wave of interference sweeping across space like a shadow swallowing signals whole. It made no sense. Nothing human, nothing alien could create that kind of silence. And yet it was here, crushing the outpost in invisible weight. Hours passed before emergency systems held enough to restore basic power. The alarms fell quiet, but the tension remained. No one slept that night. And Mara knew the whispers would grow. The prisoner's warnings would spread like fire among frightened minds. And still she returned to his cell once the chaos eased. He was there, sitting once more, chains wrapped around him, his voice calm as ever. When he spoke, you felt it, didn't you? The silence. Mara swallowed hard, refusing to admit it, but her hands trembled too much to hide. He leaned closer, his eyes burning like twin embers through the dark. This is only the beginning. Mara pressed her hand to the glass, her voice shaking. What do you want from me? His reply was simple: when the chains break, remember who I am, not what they told you. She tried to speak, but the words would not come. Only silence hung between them, a silence heavier than any chain. The station felt different after the blackout. The crew walked with restless eyes. Weapons always close at hand, voices hushed as if the air itself had grown too heavy to carry sound. Mara noticed it everywhere. In the command deck, the fear was spreading, and fear was dangerous. It broke discipline. It turned soldiers into shadows of themselves. She kept her face steady, her tone sharp when she gave orders. But inside her chest, the unease grew heavier, because she knew what none of them did, that the prisoner had warned her long before the alarms sounded, long before the silence swallowed their sensors. She told herself to stay away from him. She told herself that her duty was to the station, to her commander, to the chain of command. Yet every night she found her feet carrying her back to the restricted wing. The guards no longer questioned her presence. Perhaps they were too afraid, or perhaps they too felt something strange in the air and wanted her there, as if her presence meant control. But she knew better. There was no control, only the illusion of it. The prisoner sat as he always did, still wrapped in chains, still calm. But when Mara came close, he lifted his head, and his voice cut through the silence like a blade. It is closer now. She gritted her teeth and whispered, what is it? He did not hesitate. Darkness, hunger not born from flesh, but from the void itself. You feel it, don't you? Mara wanted to deny it, but the memory of the blackout still haunted her the way the sensors showed. Nothing, yet something was there. Something vast pressing against them. She looked into his burning eyes and whispered, hey, why us? Why this outpost? He answered slowly, because Earth struck the first wound against it long ago, and you carry that defiance still. Mara's breath hitched the thought of Earth fighting something so vast felt impossible, yet something inside her stirred like a half-remembered dream. She asked again, her voice breaking, if this thing is so powerful, how did you survive? He leaned forward, the chains groaning against the pole, and whispered, because I was made to stand where others fall. I am not your enemy, Mara. I am your weapon if you dare to use me. His words struck her deep, and she hated how they made sense. Hated How her heart quickened with something dangerously close to belief, she turned away. Muttering, "You are a monster," he did not deny it. He only said softly, "Monsters are what humanity has always needed." When the night grows to dark the next day, her commander gathered the senior officers, his face drawn with exhaustion, his voice sharp. "The interference is spreading," he said. "Star systems near us have gone silent. No trade, no signals, no answers." His eyes hardened. "We are on our own until we learn more." Mara felt the tension rise in the room. She saw the fear behind every pair of eyes, and for the first time, she wondered how long they could last if the silence swallowed them. To that night, Mara returned to the prisoner, once more unable to resist. He was standing, this time the chains stretched tight across his body, the glow of the restraints flickering faintly. He said nothing at first, only watched her, his gaze steady, unblinking. Finally she whispered, "Tell me what happens when the chains break." His lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Freedom," he said, "but not mine alone, yours too. The darkness will come for this place, and when it does, you will have to choose to release me or die believing their lies." Her throat tightened. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, unable to look away from him. Her thoughts warring between duty and instinct, between the stories she was raised to believe and the truth that seemed to bleed through every crack in his words. The silence between them stretched heavy again, until at last he spoke once more, his voice softer than before. "Mara, you already know the answer." She closed her eyes, her heart hammering because she feared he was right. The following days unfolded like a storm without thunder, silence everywhere, yet tension building heavy and sharp across the station. Mara felt it in every step, every word spoken by the crew, their nerves frayed, their discipline cracking. She watched officers glance nervously at the dark corners of the corridors, soldiers whispering about voices in their dreams. Even the engineers, once laughed under pressure, now kept their heads low, muttering about systems draining power faster than they could repair. And all the while the prisoner remained chained at the center of it all, unmoving, unyielding, like a shadow waiting to be recognized. Mara kept telling herself she would stop visiting him, that every night she spent staring into those burning eyes pulled her further away from the soldier she was supposed to be. But her body betrayed her once more and carried her to the cell where he waited, as if he knew she would come. His voice was low and certain when he spoke. "They are close now," Mara whispered. "Who? The darkness," he answered. "The things that serve it, the ones who go before the void to weaken what it seeks to consume." She shivered despite herself, her pulse thundering in her ears. "Then why us? Why now?" He tilted his head slowly. "Because you still remember, even if you pretend not to. Your blood remembers, your world remembers. You were not meant to kneel to the void." Mara, the way he said it made her chest tighten. She wanted to shout that he was wrong, but something in her heart stirred, as if some buried truth had been spoken aloud. She gripped the rail of the observation window to steady herself and hissed, "You talk like you know humanity better than we do." His eyes burned brighter than before. "Because I was there," he said. "I was made for it." And then his chains rattled like an echo of thunder. Mara fled before he could say more. Yet his words chased her into her sleep that night. She dreamed of fire across the stars, of humanity standing tall against waves, of shadow ships, their weapons blazing with a fury that split the void itself. And she saw the prisoner among them, not as an enemy, but as a guardian, a weapon forged in their image. She woke with her throat dry, her heart racing, the echo of his voice still inside her mind. On the command deck, reports grew darker, the silence spreading faster, whole sectors failing to answer distress calls and trade beacons. Mara's commander barked orders, but the fear in his voice could not be hidden. He looked older, thinner, as if the weight of an unseen war pressed down on him. Mara wanted to speak of the prisoner's warnings, but her voice caught in her throat because she knew the response would be silence, or worse. That evening another blackout struck. Sudden and violent alarms, shrieking lights flickering, the hull shuddering, as if something massive pressed against it. The crew scrambled, shouting orders. Chaos echoing through the metal halls. Mara fought through the confusion to reach the prisoners' wing, and what she saw stopped her cold. The chains were glowing to bright cracks of light, running along them as though they strained against an invisible force. The prisoner stood tall, eyes burning like suns, his voice rolling through the chaos. Like a command, Mara, The choice is coming. The cell doors shuddered, sparks flying as systems. Failed guards panicked, weapons raised, shouting orders that no one heard. Mara's breath hitched. As she saw the restraints bend, almost breaking, she pressed her hand to the cold glass, torn between duty and the gnawing certainty that he was telling the truth. The blackout deepened the silence, thick as smoke, and for a moment she swore she heard whispers, not from the prisoner, but from the void itself. Crawling across her skin, voices that spoke of despair, of surrender, of the inevitability of being swallowed whole. She ripped her hand back, trembling, her heart screaming in her chest. The power surged once more, systems stabilizing, alarms dimming. But the image of the prisoner remained burned into her mind. His chains weakened, his body tense, as if ready to rise. The commander's voice crackled over, comes demanding reports, demanding answers, but none came because no one could explain what. They had just felt. Mara could not sleep that night. She sat alone, staring out into the endless void, and all she could see were shadows moving in the stars, waiting, watching, pressing closer with every silent hour. The silence after the blackout was heavier than anything before it. Was not just the hum of machines dying down or the nervous voices of soldiers fading away. It was a silence that pressed on the chest of everyone aboard. The station like invisible. Hands. Mara walked the corridors and felt it gripping at her lungs. Every step sounding louder than it should, as if the station itself had become a tomb. The crew avoided each other's eyes. No one spoke unless forced. And when they did, it was quick. Sharp words filled with fear. Mara tried to keep her focus on routine, but her thoughts kept circling back to the prisoner, his words, his voice. The way his chains had burned with light, as though the universe itself wanted to tear them apart. She told herself she would not go back, that to do so was betrayal of her command, of her duty, of everything she had sworn to protect. But that same night, she found herself standing in front of the reinforced door, staring at the dark figure beyond it. The guards did not question her anymore. They seemed almost relieved when she appeared, as though the burden of watching him alone was too much. The prisoner was not sitting this time. He was standing, tall, chains taut across his body, glowing faintly. His eyes fixed on her. When she stepped closer, you felt it. He said, his voice calm, certain. She tried to keep her own steady. I felt nothing. His gaze narrowed. The lies you tell yourself will not save you, Mara. The void is pressing harder. It will not stop until all of this is ash. Her heart pounded. She gritted her teeth and hissed, then tell me. Why it wants us, why humanity, what threat are we to something so vast? His answer came without hesitation. Because you were the only ones who ever fought it. You carried defiance in your blood. You were born to stand against it, no matter the cost. Mara's throat tightened, his words echoing the dreams that haunted her, fire and steel blazing. Across the stars, humanity unbroken, even when surrounded by endless night. Before she could speak, alarms blared again, a sensor officer's voice cracking over the comms. Unidentified contact bearing down fast. The crew scrambled. The command deck came alive with shouts and flashing lights. Mara staggered as the station trembled, a shadow passing against the stars, too vast to silent to be anything they knew. The void, Mara whispered to herself. She ran to the prisoner's cell and found him waiting, eyes burning brighter than before, his voice cutting through the chaos. It is here, Mara. Your people are not ready, but I am. You must choose now. She stood, frozen hands trembling as the deck shook again. The sound of tearing metal echoing through the halls. Soldiers screamed orders, voices breaking in. Panic. Mara pressed her forehead against the cold glass and whispered, if I release you, what happens? His response was a whisper, almost tender, you survive. Her cum crackled, the commander's voice filled with desperation. All hands to battle stations. We are under attack, unknown hostiles. We cannot hold. Mara's heart pounded as she turned to the console. The codes locked away under layers of authority she should not have had, but the blackouts had damaged the system enough to leave cracks. Her fingers hovered above the panel, her mind a storm of doubt and fear. The prisoner watched her in silence. No pressure, no command, only waiting. The station shook violently, lights dying again. The darkness deeper than before. Mara gasped as the whispers returned, crawling through her mind, urging surrender, urging silence. Her vision blurred, her body cold. She pressed her hands to the panel and screamed as if to drown them out. The glass barrier hissed, the chains cracked, and with a roar that seemed to shake the void itself, the prisoner stepped forward free for the first time in ages, his body blazing with energy, his eyes burning like twin suns. The silence shattered. The void itself seemed to recoil. Mara staggered back, her chest heaving. The prisoner stood over her, chains falling to the floor like broken bones. His voice thundered not at her but at the darkness pressing outside. I am returned, and I will not fall. Mara's fear was swallowed by something else, awe, the kind that burned. In the heart, when witnessing something beyond understanding, the whispers vanished, the shadows seemed to falter for the first time, and Mara realized the battle was only beginning. The station groaned under the weight of the enemy. Outside, metal screamed. As if the void itself was tearing at its bones, shadows writhed against the viewports, blotting out the stars with shapes that defied form, twisting, shifting, clawing. As if they were alive, the crew shouted through static-filled cums, weapons fired into the dark, but nothing seemed to land, nothing seemed to matter. Then the prisoner stepped forward, no longer bound, no longer silent, his body blazing with light so fierce it made the shadows recoil. As if burned, Mara stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat as he moved through the corridor, every step a pulse of energy, every movement scattering the whispers that had haunted them for weeks. Soldiers stumbled back, some dropping their weapons, their fear melting into stunned awe. The prisoner looked at Mara as he passed, his voice low, steady, and filled with power. Stand with me, or die with them. Your choice? He did not stop to wait for her answer. He walked straight to the command deck. The commander's voice cracked with fear as he saw the figure stride through the chaos, guns raised instinctively, but the prisoner raised his hand and the weapons fell apart in sparks as though their metal obeyed him. The commander shouted, "What is this? What have you done?" But the prisoner's eyes burned brighter. Humanity has been asleep for too long. You buried me, you forgot what you were meant to be, but the void has not forgotten, and it comes for you. Mara stepped forward, her voice shaking but stronger than before. He saved us, she cried. You all saw it, the void fears him. The crew stared, wide-eyed, torn between fear and belief, but the station shuddered again, and the choice was stripped from them. Outside, the enemy pressed harder, claws of shadow piercing the hall, tearing through metal like paper. Alarms screamed, oxygen dropping, shields breaking, fire racing through sections of the station. Mara's chest tightened as she watched the prisoner step before the viewport, raising his hands, his body igniting with white fire that streamed outward into the dark. The shadows screamed, though no sound filled the air. Their forms writhing, burning, disintegrating under the force of his light. The crew shielded their eyes, some falling to their knees, whispering prayers not to gods, but to him. Mara could not look away. She felt the heat on her skin, the pull in her chest, as if some part of her blood remembered him, remembered what humanity had once been. She whispered to herself, he was right, he was telling the truth. The prisoner turned his head slightly, his voice reaching her, even over the roar of the battle. The void fears you, to Mara. It always has, she gasped, because she felt it then, the whispers clawing at her mind, retreating not because of him, but because of something inside her, the fire in her veins, answering his. The station cracked under the strain, halls collapsing, life support failing. Mara knew they could not hold much longer. The prisoner seemed to know as well, his shoulders straightening, his light flaring brighter than ever before. I cannot stay bound to this shell, he said, but you can lead them, Mara. Humanity does not fall tonight, but it will need a voice, one that remembers what it means to fight. She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. I am no leader. I am just a soldier. His eyes locked with hers. No, Mara, you are human, and that is enough. With a final roar, he threw his arms wide. The chains at his feet vaporized the fire in his body. Surging outward into the void, the shadows screamed louder. Folding in on themselves, collapsing into nothing, the stars reappeared one by one as the darkness burned away until only silence remained, not the heavy silence of dread, but the silence of peace. The station floated, damaged, scarred, but alive. The crew rose slowly, trembling but breathing for the first time in what felt like forever. Mara stared at the space where he had stood, but he was gone, the fire extinguished, leaving only faint scorch marks on the floor and the echo of his voice in her heart. The commander stumbled forward, his eyes wide, his voice hollow. What now? Mara looked out at the stars, her chest still burning with the fire he had awakened. We remember, she said simple words, but they rang louder than alarms, louder than fear, because the crew felt it too. Humanity was not broken. Humanity was not forgotten. They were not alone. And in the silence that followed, Mara swore she could still hear him in the distance, waiting, watching, whispering through the stars, a promise. Not of despair, but of defiance, a promise that humanity would never kneel to the void again.